Why don't we go ahead and get started? Jim Digby, thanks for joining me today.
It's always a pleasure, Jen. You know that. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I always say spreadsheets are my art, and I feel confident in saying writers are your art.
Well, writers have a unique place in my heart, that's for sure. And I have a unique journey with writers. And spreadsheets have a unique journey in your heart, and that's a good thing too.
So why don't you tell the fine folks at home a little bit about your production career and how you have ended up here with us today?
Good Lord. Okay, so I was the AV nerd in junior high school. Cut to working at Disney World for a few years as a technician, and in film school while at Disney World. Cut to roommate gets a job on a tour. I asked to hop along on that tour, and not knowing that you could make a living in this business, and that worked out. I was, technically inclined as a young professional, and did a lot of technical things over time, and eventually that led to stage management, and from stage management to production management. And as you know, there's no benchmarking processes along the way. There's no barriers to entry. So pretty much anybody, including me, can become a production manager. As equally true, there's no uniform set of templates for spreadsheets, right, Jen? There's no uniform set of templates for writers. There really isn't any uniformity, other than the only uniform thing is there's no uniformity. So one either inherits a writer or a spreadsheet from somebody else, and then tweaks it to fit the particular project they're on, or one creates it from scratch, having seen some in the past. So I end up being someone who recognizes the power in the writer, and the fact that it really is. You hear people tell you in the early days, it's all in the advance. It's all in the advance. Well, good days and bad days, I think, are started by good advances or bad advances, and good information in the writer, or not so good information in the writer, and the timeline with which that writer's delivered, period.
So let me just force you to be a little bit of a name dropper. Can you let the people know what types of artists you've worked for?
Sure. Sorry. The first artist group I worked with was Genesis, with Phil Collins as the singer. And then from Genesis to Phil Collins, Bon Jovi, Marilyn Manson, Backstreet Boys, Enrique Iglesias, the Bolshoi Ballet. I was doing Bolshoi Ballet around the same time I was doing Manson. It was a really strange dichotomy. And most notably Linkin Park, where I spent the better part of their career and mine, 16 years, alongside that group, and developing alongside of them, fine-tuning my skills. Name drop.
Awesome. So to start diving into this, we need a couple of quick definitions. We need to define what a writer is and define what advancing is. And then that'll kind of give us a basis for all of the stuff forward. Can you do that?
Okay. Are you going to do that? I'm going to do that.
You can do that.
Oh, well, for me, the writer is the lead document. It's the charter document of the tour and the artist. It's specific to each artist. It's specific to each tour of each artist. So you may be doing a club tour in one iteration, and the writer has to address the needs of the club tour. And then in another iteration, you may be headlining stadiums, and that's a completely different writer that needs to address the needs of the stadiums. Within the writer, you're spelling out your fundamental needs that need to be provided locally. You're potentially talking about seat kills that may be brought on by special effects or sight lines to your stage. You're setting up expectations for labor needs, for food, for towels, everything soup to nuts. And course, everybody's heard the story of the brown M&Ms. I'm sure we'll get to that later on. And then the advance is the accompanying exchange of communications, be it via email, telephone, telex, however you get it done. The advance is information contained within the rider that you then walk a local promoter or venue rep or whoever's hosting you at your show site. You walk through those needs and verify that nothing's been lost in translation or nothing's been lost in the communication of the paperwork. So the advance supports the rider. The rider allows the promoter in early days, just when a show is booked, to establish the budget, and everything moves from there.
Awesome. Exactly what I wanted you to say.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how, so riders really kind of started out as a written document, frequently would be put into either a PDF format or would be sent along in print version with the contract sometimes, or even probably mailed or faxed. I'm really excited when we're gonna get to looking at one of your riders, which you use a website format for, which I think is brilliant because it's a great way to organize information. But why don't you talk a little bit about kind of how your rider evolved, how riders evolved over time, that stuff.
Sure. Pre having the responsibility for a rider, my curiosity had me looking through riders, sitting next to the production manager's desk and reading through the riders, or the production manager may have been asking me for information relative to my sphere of responsibility that would be included in the rider. So the first rider I crafted was a hybrid of the existing rider with a couple of words from me. And as part of my desire to discover how that information was being used, I would frequently sit down and have conversations with the local promoters and say, well, was the information good? Did it serve the need? Can I see what you did with that information? So early on, very early on, through a relationship with a local promoter, he shared with me how the building reinterpreted the information that I had shared with the promoter, and how he had reinterpreted the information. So I was able to see that, item A started with me on the rider, went to promoter reinterpreted it to satisfy the needs of the local provider, or satisfy the needs of the venue. And then it ended up on the venue's desk. They had their own template for what they would do with the information coming from the rider. So that caused me to be super curious about, how things get lost in translation as they go from iteration to iteration, and decided at that point to start crafting the riders that I was writing to look more like the end use case that the promoters and the venues were turning it into. So there was less room for misinterpretation, and it was less legwork for the promoter and the venue to cull out their needs from the document that I delivered. So I philosophically, I came to a couple of these are going to be my guiding rules for me when I put a rider together, and the premise is, as much as I possibly can, the show stop critical things, I don't ask a promoter to provide, because they're show stop critical, and you may be going into the hands of a promoter who doesn't understand the request, hasn't asked to clarify it, has told you they've got it and they don't deliver it. Any number of things can go wrong between the transmission of the request and the receiving of the request and then the delivery of it. So
can you give an example of...
Sure. Working with Marilyn Manson, he needed oxygen from an oxygen tank with a specific mask type before he went on stage every night. Now we're talking 1999. We're talking during his big days. And if that oxygen tank wasn't present and visible to him, then the chances are he may have a reaction to that, which was less than good for the show. So it became one of these show stop items. It was something that was so specific and so necessary for him to have a good night, and all of our desire was to ensure that he had a good night, that and the promoters were unable to consistently provide the same mechanism every night. So I made the decision then that component, because it's so hypercritical, goes on the truck. I know it doesn't seem like anything earth-shattering, but the point of that example is the things that are super duper important that can easily be misinterpreted, that you can't send a picture for or now a website link for, carry it with you. Don't ask the promoter to do it unless you can't for some reason. Sorry, I've gotten lost in that story, Jen. Where do you want to bring me back to? Yeah.
So we were talking about show stop need, and that when you put the responsibility in the hands of somebody who doesn't work for the artist.
Right. So right. So thank you. If you're fortunate enough to be working for the artist, and I hope most of you will, no one shares your sense of urgency for delivering the artist's needs more than you do. That's a good rule to tell yourself. That the reason you have the job working for the artist is the artist has confidence that you will deliver the things that they require to have a good day. The promoter, who shares a responsibility and a level of desire to make sure that that person has a good day, may be focused on a bunch of other things beyond your artist. And therefore, they may impact your possibility for a good day in a negative way if you haven't given them all the information to succeed and given it to them in a timely manner. I say that because to this day, there's still no mechanism, there's no requirement for when a rider gets delivered, what format the rider is delivered in, meaning how is it constructed? There's no template for this across the entire industry. Some people don't deliver their rider until the day of the show. Some people never deliver. I know some people never deliver their rider. Some people fill their riders full of extraneous information to be clever and demonstrate how anecdotal they can be. That's fun. But imagine putting yourself in the shoes of the promoter who's trying to read, maybe a dozen riders a week. And within 30 pages of anecdotal information, there may be 3 pages of stuff that I really need to know to get the show done. My approach is I try to strip out all the information that demonstrates how clever I am and only pack into the rider the information that's required to succeed, to have the show. That's what I'm being paid for. So while I enjoy reading those riders with all the anecdotal information, and I'm sure the promoters do as well, a promoter really busy in the height of a summer season who's reading dozens of riders may get bogged down trying to find the things that actually matter in a rider that's got good storytelling in it. I'm not knocking the good storytelling. I love it. It's just not the approach I use. So when assembling the rider for me, I want to make sure that all the bullet points are front and center, and that the actual needs that we have to deliver the show are easy to find and easy to interpret. And where there are complex things like a particular valve that you might need for a cryo tank, we're sending a photograph and a link for that kind of tank or that kind of valve that needs to be delivered locally, period.
I think presenting the information in a way both visually and concisely is key to a good writer. I've seen a wide variety of them, and if you are listing the number of stagehands and riggers and teamsters truck loaders that you need,
Jen, you dropped off. Say it again, Jen. I lost you for one quick second there.
Oh, my internet connection was unstable. Having seen a wide variety of riders, things that can be a very concise, easy to read list, like labor requirements. You've got stagehands, riggers, truck loaders, electricians, whatever. I have sometimes seen that written out in sentence form with the numbers in the word, like THREE, and I read it and I'm just like, you could have made this so much easier to have a clear list.
We could have helped you have a really good day if you had just told me that. So,
right.
So I guess, look, I think that this portion of the story needs to go back to the origins of the relationship, or the few decades old origins of the relationship between artist camp, management camp, booking agent camp, and promoters. So, you know, there was, and still is, there are promoters out there, as there are music camps, of, you know, varying reputations. And in the early days, the rider was used to try to ensure that the promoter was competent. They were reading the rider. They were, you know, they were delivering all the show needs that you didn't normally carry with you in the early days. So, and that relationship was borderline on confrontational, sometimes hostile, and there was this, you know, there was this always this tension between promoters and artist camps. So the rider became a tool to challenge the promoter. To you know, nuggets, Easter eggs were buried in riders, like the Brown M&M story, to ensure that the promoter had written the rider. And if you, I'm sorry, had read the rider.
So the idea with that is, I think it was Van Halen that put, they wanted M&Ms with the brown ones removed in the dressing room. And the idea was, when the production manager walked in and saw that there was a bowl of M&Ms with the brown ones removed, they knew if they paid attention, if the promoter paid attention to that little detail, they would have paid attention to the big details as well. So that's the whole, like, M&M story. So I would say, somebody asked what we consider clever in a rider and what's too clever and should be completely avoided. I would say that perhaps some of those types of things have been done a lot and maybe are not considered cute anymore.
Right. Well, and I'm sure we're going to get into these technical questions, but yeah. So back to the history of the journey as I know it. That's exactly correct. Van Halen put that in there as a visual cue to find out whether or not promoter had read the rider. There are a number of ways to do that, and that certainly is the legacy story that everybody knows. And it's important to know that the rider has been read. Why bother writing it if it's not going to be read? At the same time, it's also important to deliver the rider to the promoter with enough time for them to budget, plan, and deliver the goods that you've got on it. So what does that look like? You know, the timeline for the conversation around the rider, and I know we're out here macro, but we will be coming into the micro, right? The timeline around the rider is manager, artist, booking agent, book show 6 months out. Effective promoters are looking at those bookings within a reasonable timeline, let's say 3 months, so that they can budget for those shows, or maybe even they're budgeting for those shows at the time of booking. And they're going to be asking, promoters will be asking show representatives, tour managers, production managers, what's the show going to look like, potentially before you even know what the show is going to look like. And the reason they're asking those questions is they're trying to get a budget that's close to accurate. Is it, and they ask macro questions 3 months out, 6 months out. How many trucks, how many buses, roughly how many people? And they can do the math from those things to get to a reasonable number of stagehands, a reasonable number of how long the day is going to be, so that they can at least answer the early budgeting questions. So there's this promoter being your business partner moment in time where you want to feed them as accurate information as you have that far in advance. As your information.
One of the reasons for that, having been a talent buyer and done a lot of budgeting for shows, and a lot of times we would only get the facts of like how many trucks, but that's how we knew how to estimate every truck costs X amount of dollars in stagehands. So that is happening in the process of how an idea becomes a tour. That happens when the talent buyer from the promoter is negotiating the artist performance fee and the deal with the agent. And the reason that it is particularly important to have that information at that point is because it's going to affect the deal, the financial deal that the promoter can offer the artist.
Correct. So, and a lot of the challenge at that point in time, in the time horizon, the challenge there is production or tour manager might not even be hired yet.
Right.
Right. So what happens often is the buyer is because the agent has delivered them the rider from 2018. Now the buyer is basing their estimates on a show that's 2 years old. Well, in lack of any other information, that's acceptable to some degree, right? That's analogous estimating. So in the analogous estimating phase where you don't have any details, it's gonna at least get you close because you'll already be talking about venue size. So if you've got something in the, in the asset bank from a previous tour, you can go that as of a similar venue size, you could go back and look at it to get started. Then, the people who are actually constructing the tour itself, then after that, after the deal is done, you may get artist vision, which then translates into tour manager, production manager, how many trucks, and the complexity of the show. Where that's really difficult, way back out that far in the timeline, is you may be estimating for all the seats and all the floor space except for front of house and a normal 60 by 40 stage or whatever the stage size is at the particular venue, and then find out after the fact, after tickets are on sale, that there's going to be a runway straight down the middle of the arena to a B stage. And now you have less capacity than what the show was calculated on. So I think that may be coming away from riders a little bit, but it's,
yeah, but it's demonstrating that when you have budgeted a show and determined what your revenue potential is based on the number of seats that you plan on having available and at particular ticket prices, and then the production comes in and says, well, these seats aren't going to be able to see because we're going to hang a bunch of stuff right in front of it, and we're going to put this walkway in, so we're going to have to move those seats to somewhere else. It can not only is this process affected by the expenses, but now not having an accurate rider at the time of booking the show affects the revenue potential as well.
That's right. And it sets up that confrontational relationship we're trying to avoid.
And then when I'm settling the show, I'm arguing about, well, why didn't anybody know this before? And
right.
Why are we paying for this?
It all occurred likely before the operational staff was brought on.
Right.
So then there's the next step in the rider where we've started to develop what the idea is for the show. We know roughly how many trucks. We know roughly what the rigging plot's going to look like. We know roughly what the capacities in the house should look like. We know our sight lines, et cetera. Now you're having a more detailed conversation. Those things are typically transmitted by a package of rider information, an addendum to the contract. They should spell out, and they should be delivered in a timely enough manner that the whoever's providing the local rigging services has a chance to review the rigging plot and ensure that it works in that building.
So that would mean, can the building hang the amount of weight from the ceiling that the show is carrying and wants to hang from the ceiling? So there's some logistics. Yeah. Will it make the ceiling collapse? Well, we're going to have to change stuff.
Right, in the location that they'd like to hang it. So you're right, there's some formula there. And it sets up, the more micro needs of how many mouths in catering roughly, how many towels do I need? How much electricity do I need? Basically, now at this point, you should be fine tuning the needs to ensure that you have a good day on the show site. That can be transmitted electronically as long as you're able to confirm that it's been received. And that I think should be, I think the relative norm for that is at least 4 weeks out if you know what you're doing at that time. And then you're having a follow-up phone conversation. I personally like to have that phone conversation in the early horizon, as soon as we know we're booking your venue. Hey, don't know yet what it's going to be. We think it's going to be this. This is what the internal dialogue is. 6 trucks, 3 buses, an average rigging plot, average stage size, normal location. That's enough detail to get promoters to kind of get close with a budget, usually, unless it's a very complex show. And then, so that's an early phone call just to say, hey, catch up. Just want to make sure that you saw it. I'll let you know as soon as we get more details.
It also helps during busy seasons to give the promoter, especially on like outdoor shows, lead time to make sure that there's enough fencing to be rented or enough porta potties. If it's festival season in Chicago, it's like there's street festivals every weekend. There's like so many festivals that there can be, in a market, it can be challenging to get the things that are required sometimes. So the more time in advance, scheduling those stage hands, making sure that like the more time that you can give, you're more likely to have success in getting the things that you have requested.
Absolutely true. And to add to that complexity, the nuance of where you're going to do the show. So if I'm going to go do the show in China, the advanced timeline and the horizon looks completely different if I'm going to go do it in Paris. If I'm going to do it in Indonesia, the detail looks different than if I'm going to do it in Paris. And experience tells me that, once you come to know what working in other territories looks like, there should be a level of communication specific to that territory rather than unfortunately what we hear a lot is, well, it was in the rider. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that the receiver of that information understood it. And people are afraid to say, hey, I don't understand, which is the value of the phone call. So a frequent mistake is people push a rider out the door via email, and they've done their job at that point. And then when they come in and things aren't exactly correct, they stomp their feet quite a bit and shout at promoters, their local partners, for getting it wrong. And sometimes what you find out is that you didn't invest the time you needed to help the promoter understand your needs. Sometimes it's a failure on the promoter side. Sometimes you didn't deliver it until it was the day of the show. So there are a number of reasons for the sender of the information, the receiver of the information, to touch base with each other frequently to ensure everybody understands what the needs are, especially if you've got a complex show.
So you start out early on with a phone call, the human connection. You email the details, and I think that it's really important here that, and this is something we both do, is ask for confirmation. And right. I would have, in my settlement advances, it was a long, lengthy email with a lot of information because I was always aiming to answer questions before they were asked of me. Here are the tax forms. Here's when I want audits. Here's how I want to settle. Here are my cash needs. And I would require them to respond back, not just like, got it, but I wanted to know who's the box office manager, who am I settling with, what time does the box office, I had specific things that they needed to respond back with, and I would badger them until I got all of those answers.
Right, so you've just defined a useful Easter egg, right? So as opposed to brown M&Ms, where a human is gonna have to go extract them from the bowl, which is cute, but you've put Easter eggs in your requests for information that have a desired timeline to get responded to. Who is the box office manager? Well, if you're a week out and you still haven't heard that information, in addition to your being a pest, you may assume at that point that perhaps the rider wasn't read, right? That information wasn't responded to. I think it's important from a communication standpoint to always remember that you've got your world and your receivers have their world, and don't instantly jump to a negative conclusion when things haven't gone the way you would like them to be from a communication standpoint, that perhaps there's something going on at the venue. You don't know what just happened over there, or there's something going on in that promoter's life that has caused a slower than normal response time. So it's okay to pester, but I would encourage that pestering to be done in a friendly manner until you have a reason to believe you shouldn't do it in a friendly manner, which hopefully.
So let me define my pestering slightly better, because I realize now that they.
Yeah, no, I don't mean it to you. Yeah.
So I would have, when I'm on tour, I have tasks that I assign myself for Monday. Well, usually Tuesday, because a lot of times Monday's off. I have tasks that I assign myself for each day of the week. And one of those tasks is to send out my settlement advance for the week that is like 3 or 4 weeks in the future. And so I send that out on, say, Monday. If I haven't gotten a response by Friday, one of my Friday tasks is follow up. And I keep in mind the days of the week that we're on tour and every day is a work day, but I do try to be conscious of the fact that venues a lot of times have more normal working hours. So I build into my schedule specific follow-up times where I've given people plenty of opportunity to receive the information, pass it on to relevant parties on their team, and get a response back. And, so usually the follow-up email makes things happen when I say, hey, just checking in, I haven't heard back from you on this.
Right. Well, the other half of the equation is, what can the promoter provide about a particular show site, right? Which could be a contra rider from the promoter. They're like the writers from artist being communicated outward, the current classification of information from a venue advance document, which tells me about the venue, is all over the map as well. So what's your advance package look like to X venue? You may get photographs of the seating area and the entryway and some talk about, what's happening in the concourse, but you may get no backstage information. That's an inexperienced venue potentially. Then you may get real great detail on everything backstage. The power is located here. It's exactly 102 meters from there. The buses park here. Again, there's no standardization in that documentation yet. And so part of the skill of on the receiving side for the production or tour manager is, taking that venue advance package, if you haven't been to that venue before, trying to glean from it all the things that you need to know that will impact your day, and then set up a list of questions that you'll need to ask the promoter because it's not covered in that package of information. So there's also a receiving moment here where the tour is getting detail back from the promoter on what the venue looks like. I think once you've traversed most of these venues enough, that information is less relevant. And typically now when I'm having a conversation about an amphitheater, I'll just, hey, what's new, what's changed, what's different, same labor, same caterers, and that sort of thing. But you got to get to that experiential knowledge over time.
And a lot of that is building the relationship. When you see the same person year after year at the venue, you build a relationship, and then you kind of also know their level of expertise, who's reliable, that
right.
type of stuff. So we had a question on the rigging capacity for the venue. So in what might be called a tech packet from the venue, things like rigging capacities would be listed in there for a venue that is being proactive with providing information. But I believe that it's usually something that a building engineer might have to sign off on. Because it is a real, literal safety concern, those parties will connect.
Yes, hopefully.
Right.
The truth of it is that, again, and around the globe, this happens to differing degrees of accuracy, detail, and reliability. If you're taking a big artist, for instance, outside of the US to a territory that doesn't do shows a lot, you may have an overzealous promoter who just wants to get you there and knows once they get you there, you're going to do a show, and will confirm details about the venue capacities, rigging, for instance, that may or may not be accurate. So when you're touring on a scale of, where rigging is challenging because it's complex, that's an advanced trip by a rigger, or that's an actual engineer having a conversation with load ratings. That's an engineering third party to go double check that you can do those things, like Geiger. That's, there are a number of measures one can take when you're touring at that scale. The challenge is, even in the States, in North America and in South America, those details may not exist in some of these buildings. And certainly in the older buildings, those details may be less than accurate in today's time frame. So it's important that if you know that your rigging package is significant compared to what's been through that venue 100 times in a year, it's worth doing the extra homework and getting a third-party engineer, or having an advanced trip by a rigger to ensure that it's safe. But those things, you're absolutely right, those initial details need to show up in the rider, and the promoter needs to wave those flags.
Okay, so back to kind of our advancing timeline. We had the early on phone call, we've emailed details and gotten confirmation from things, and then you kind of do another phone call about a week before the show.
Right, so experienced promoters will know how to prep for shows with lots of detail, and some can navigate shows with little detail as well. and have a closet full of supplies just in case. Um, the human connection, this is a human business. This business is about all of that, being human, connecting with the humans. And the more relationships you build with promoters and venue people across the globe, the easier your life comes the next time you come back to that venue. So don't think about today, think about the next time you're back. Don't think, when you're leaving that building or when you're navigating the people who are in that building every day, your reputational risk is great if you behave in a manner that doesn't please the people who live in that building every day. So the next time you come back, you may have a harder time. So why that plays into the communication conversation is the first one is out of courtesy to say, hey man, I'm glad I'm doing a show with you again. Haven't seen you in a long time. What's new? How's the family? Here are the details as I know them: 6 trucks, 3 buses. The second one is to review the detailed information that you've presented in your rider in a timely manner. And then the one just before the show, I typically use as anything going on I need to know about. Is the weather going to be okay? If it's winter season and I'm up north, are you ice storm, snowstorm, anything we need to know. And I use that last touch in just to make sure, just to take everybody's temperature and to make sure that I haven't left out any details that have suddenly become relevant. Because the truth is, the receivers, the promoters, may not be fully focused on the show that I'm bringing until it's just around the corner. So there's a level of interest that gets, it's this tone of certainty that weather forecasters use. There's a level of interest by the promoter that gets greater the closer you get to the venue. I know not to call them 4 weeks out and say, hey, here's my towel needs. They don't care about my towel needs 4 weeks out. But, I know that they're starting to pay attention to my show or the show that I'm bringing into town now, because it's right around the corner. It's 2 or 3 days away, or 4 days out. They've got to book to Union, or whatever those benchmarks are, those milestones are that make them start paying more attention. So I always do a close in call as well. I know they're fully focused at that time.
I just want to mention to everybody out there, if you have questions, can you please put them in the Q&A rather than the chat? It's hard for me to I got 2 screens open, and keeping the chat is more challenging. So if you have a specific question you would like us to answer rather than conversation amongst yourselves, please put it in the Q&A.
And I think it's also important to note we're getting to actually looking at a rider, but we're covering these kind of macro topics first.
We are going to get into the nitty gritty. So the detail, the questions that we've gotten on how specific do you need to be on labor requirements? The answer is very, and we will, you will see a demonstration of that.
Right. So go ahead, Jen.
Okay. Weather, I would say, especially when we did Warp Tour, if there was any potential of weather, and practically, I would say every day the production manager called the venue for the next day, the very day before. Anything weird going, because also we would potentially have to completely shift the layout of the festival around, where you're normally putting the festival flooded. So now you're gonna go put this festival in a new spot, or, things like that would come up frequently. So that kind of the day before check-in is, depending on the tour you're on, can be really important as well. Crossing borders, creating contingency plans, talking to new promoters. I want to cover kind of these things, and then we'll dive into looking at a rider.
So another macro point about the rider is that they can, history teaches us that promoters have very good local knowledge. And there are occasions, especially in festivals, where that local knowledge is super important to your bringing the show to town. There may be streets closed because of the festival that you don't know about, your drivers don't know about. There may be protests on somewhere. As you said, there may be flooding, or there may be a hotel that your travel agent may not know about or may not be looking at. Or you may need to take your artist out to dinner, or the artist may choose to go out to dinner without you, which is more often the case. so those are the other places where a phone call has value to a local promoter. It helps the promoter feel they're a part of the mechanism, your ecosystem, your family. And I've found, having grown up in the time where that relationship, watching that relationship be confrontational, that for me to embrace the local venue folks and the local promoter as partners in the success of our day and communicate in that way and attempt to give them the details so they can succeed and we can all look great, that inspires the promoters and the venue folks to do the right thing for you. Those who choose to address them in a different way, negatively or without compassion, or bully, there's a lot of bullying that goes on in that relationship, typically find their days are much harder. And an early on example for me prior to having a leadership role was, a particular production manager would go into a venue and piss off everybody in that venue first thing in the morning by shouting at the union or shouting at the promoter. And then all of those people who are there to help you have a better day now don't care about helping you have a better day. And, hand to God, it was me as well. I didn't know any other example. In my early days, I thought that was the way it got done. It's clear that we're all in this business to have a good day. And the thing we are most protective of is our artists' day. And our artists may have a relationship with the promoter that you don't know about, or the building that you don't know about. And your bad behavior, if that's what's happening, may get back to the artist you're representing without your knowledge. And then you could find yourself on a different career path. So especially now in these times of being compassionate, being all, united, we are truly stronger together. And it's important to maintain and cultivate relationships with the local venues and the local promoters. A lot of people in the lead roles on tours don't take the time to do that. And it can be a market separator for you.
And I would say, to kind of tie into that, one of the most important skills that any of us in this business, especially those of us in leadership roles, have is communication. During the course of a day, I might be talking to people with wide ranges in experience, education, backgrounds, just a wide range of people. And I always think, how am I going to get my point across to this particular person to get them to do the thing I need them to do right now? And that's going to be different if I'm talking to the venue's general manager than if I'm talking to a bus driver, than if I'm talking to a stagehand or the runner, right? Like, knowing who you're talking to and how to communicate effectively to get your thing happen, because we don't have a lot of time. We got to get the doors open and the show happening. That is a skill everybody, I think, should practice and refine and be conscious of.
Communication is everything. And recently, only recently, someone said to me, and it might have been you, I needed a production manager, not a production doer. So the thought behind that is, it's really the production manager's role to be monitoring and engaging those communications and making all, bringing all the pieces of the team together and monitoring the health and disposition of the team. It's not that person's role to push cases. That pushing a case takes your eyes off of the bigger picture. While it's important to lead by example, for sure, it's not how one should spend their day if they're in the lead role. The lead role is managing the people and managing the opportunity, right, Jen?
And setting the tone for the environment.
Setting the tone, that's right. You're absolutely right. And so, yeah.
Okay, let's get to the fun stuff.
Let's get to the fun stuff.
All right. So
do you want to tackle the Riders for Change here or at the end?
You know what? You are my guest. Why don't we talk about that now so we make sure that it happens?
Okay, great. So the other golden thing about riders is that they can create change, or they can help to create change. This argument came about when we started the Event Safety Alliance and the lack of safety awareness or safety third mentality the industry still carries to some extent. And we would make the argument, I would stand on stage talking at our conference and say, if a rider can demand that I've got Budweiser beer in the dressing room, the rider can sure as heck demand that I've got a weather action plan, or the venue has got an active shooter plan, or the venue proves to me the stage loading capacities. If you can get these luxury items through the power of the rider, then why can't we do these bigger things through the power of the rider, like create change for safety? And now it dawns on me, and I'm sorry that it's coming at this point in my career path, that the rider is also a mechanism for stronger together, for diversity, for making sure that people, because we use the riders right now to get venues to behave in a green way. There needs to be recycled trash cans around the venue. If we're using those things, can't we say, the vendors that are providing services for you at that venue need to show up with 50% staff female and people of color, or other mechanisms like that, where this power of the addendum to the contract can set about the team's ethos, the tour's ethos, the artist's ethos. And we want to see more people of color. We want to see more women working on these shows. Please ensure that your stagehands represent the broad diversity of our industry. Please ensure that your vendors represent the broad diversity of our industry. Use those words in your riders, and suddenly the next thing you know, you're causing change. And I don't want folks to downplay how important that is. It really can make change. Small scale, but that's where it starts.
Well, and I think that is a brilliant way of being able to enact change when you are on the tour touring through and you don't have direct control over who you're hiring. It's a way to communicate that these are the things that are important to the tour, that if we are coming to your venue, this was the vibe of the tour and what we are going for. And as a female in the industry who very, very frequently is the only female in the room, the only female on the bus, the only female at the table, like that happens so much. And having a mechanism to encourage and bring light to that, in addition, for gender,
race,
diversity, all of the things. I think that that's a great way to move that forward. So
yeah, and it costs nothing. I think it also sets up an example for your team. I would share that internally as well, so that your team knows that you are asking for these things. You have the power. You as the accountant, and me as the production or tour manager, I got the power of making a decision about what vendor I'm going to hire. And unfortunately, I didn't see it before, but now I'm going to use those words. I'm going to demand diversity within the teams that come onto the crew, that come onto the tour with me.
Yeah.
And I think those are the kinds of actionable things we can do right now that help to make a change.
Excellent idea. Okay, so I'm going to answer. Hi, Brian Marquis. I had a question. I know him from the Warped Tour, and he asked about, because you mentioned recycling. Is there a way to, if that's something that is particularly important to your artist, and you have them put the recycling bins out, is there a way to help make sure that gets followed through with? A lot of times when buses are pulling away, you see the cleaning staff's just throwing it all in the same dumpster. Do you have any tips for how to follow through with some of that type of stuff?
Yeah, I'm happy to say that Linkin Park early on was one of the organizations that the group Reverb, the company Reverb, was able to work with. And I have to keep reminding myself that the audience here, may be in a much different circumstance at a different scale venue than my perspective. So forgive me for talking about the perspective that I've had, but we embraced this company Reverb, who was trying to be is an impact company on making the ecosystem of touring more environmentally friendly, and in every place try to contain the waste output of a touring show. Now, good news is now that was 2004, I think, or three. We're in a different place now, and even venues are trying to be LEED certified, and they're trying to be out in front of those things, so the task is easier. But in 2004 or five, when we attempted to do this kind of first time, we actually appointed somebody on the tour whose job it would be to make sure that the trash on the buses got separated, to hound all of us to make sure we were using reusable water bottles. There were drinking water stations that we carried with us in the trucks and put up around the backstage area of the venues. In the advance, in the rider, we were asking for the venues to do trash separation and being as environmentally responsible as they could. We set up no plastics in catering. They had to be either paper plates or reusable china, preferably. So yes, the rider can help to influence those things as well. And yes, you can. It's easier to implement than you think if you just put your mind to it. And there are likely people who will be on the tour with you who are inspired to help be a part of that mechanism.
Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to go to the fun part where we actually get to look at your rider. So as I mentioned at the beginning, frequently riders come in a linear paper format that has been written in a Word document and then PDF'd. So what I particularly love, I'm going to screen share, is that you have created a website. Hold on, share. Okay, am I sharing? Yes.
You are sharing.
So
this is a, go ahead, Jen, sorry.
This answers some of the more detailed questions as we go through this part that we've gotten asked in the Q&A. Now I got to do the, where do I put everything on my screen so that I can see the stuff and still see the screen.
So if I can, you want me to talk through the thought process?
Yeah.
Okay. So this was a 1 to 2,000 capacity venue tour for Mike Shinoda's solo album about a year and a half after Chester died by suicide. So this package had a lot of heavy to it. But the way that this rider is presented is the way that I have come to want to present the mechanism, that the team that I'm working with. And I start in a short story format, as Jen's scrolling down, to kind of give you the overview of what it is. What are the big macro things about it that you need to know early on? And you'll see here, the show length is necessary. 2 buses, 2 Arctic tractor trailers. This is a European tour. That's a common terminology there. There were a couple of dates where the buses will not be in, will be there. You can read this for yourself, but page 1, the home page, are what we've identified as, the big takeaways of information that you would want as kind of an overview. And embedded in page 1 are the hot links to the lower leveled pages, meaning lower in the tree, that you will find at the rider drop-down menu or the technical drop-down menu. But if you're riding here and you're specifically interested, if you're reading and you're specifically interested in audio, you don't necessarily have to do the drop-down technical and find audio. Here's the hot link to it, obvious stuff. And then knowing that presenting in this format at the time was, less than common, I've done this tail end line here looking for, feedback on whether or not this mechanism of delivering the information is working for the promoters or not. Again, they're your partner. Some promoters will engage in that conversation with you and feedback to say, God, this rider's awful, I can't get my head around it. Or they may say, this is a great idea, thank you, but maybe you can do this. For instance, here, the feedback was, loved it, but wanted to be able to download the relevant documents, which led to some changes in the way we do it. Jen, if you can drop down the About Us, this is just a statement of
You want me to click on one of these?
Click on Tour Team. This is just, we try to make the human thing real. So by introducing the team in this way and saying, hey, here's the people that are going to show up at your venue, it sets up for a human connection. The real human beings coming in to do these jobs, and here's a little bit of character in their photograph, so you know who we are. Additionally, in the subtext of all of that, it's a safety measure. Your security team should recognize these faces. If these aren't the faces that you're seeing with somebody saying they're the security director, chances are you're talking to the wrong person. So this is intended to set up the personality of the tour, if you will.
Love it.
Yeah. You drop down to routing there, if you would.
Yeah.
So not all tours. Oh, shoot.
It's okay. Digby shuffled some stuff around to make this for us for today. So this is not the one that was actually in action in the past.
Right. I had to do
so the routing probably is helpful for people to know where you're coming from, where you're going to. Did you have a really long drive? Did you just come out of Canada? Was there a border crossing? Where are you getting out of there to like haul 600 miles down the road right after the show? Like what's that? I would guess is why you've included the routing.
Yeah, I can screen share back to you, I think, if you want. But you're absolutely right. The other intention for including the routing is, a 4 in a row or a 3 in a row. If I'm coming into your venue after 3 back-to-back shows, you're the 4th. That tells you something about the tone and tenor of the team, different from if you're my first show of 4 in a row. I'm coming in on a hangover on the first show of 4 in a row, or well rested, depending on who you are. If I'm on the 4th of 4 in a row, the team's going to come in pretty haggard. I even have that communication with the promoter and say, hey, look, you're the 4th of 4 in a row. Do me a favor. Can you make this extra effort in the dressing rooms or in a crew room? Can you give us, can you bring in ping pong tables or something along those lines, so that the promoter can then communicate to his team, especially catering. They're on the 4 of 4 in a row. They've only had three hours sleep a night.
Food's so important. Like, give them good food. People are happy with good food.
Yeah.
So it's luxury maybe is not the right word, but it is high level touring when 4 in a row is a burden for you. Many of us Warped Tour veterans, 6 in a row was our standard, and 13 in a row we had once every summer at least. So
I apologize for missing that point.
That's okay. So, but it is important information to understand that, and that's why it's nice to see the whole tour routing, to see what is normal on this tour. And like Kevin would always say, the producer of Warped Tour, if we had 2 days off, that day that we would come back, everybody has forgotten how to do the drops, right? So, having some consciousness of, because road life is challenging. And, if you're working at the same venue every day and you've got different groups of people coming in, having some idea of where the vibe of the tour is at and their mindset is going to affect how the day's going to go, for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's important. Look, not everybody is a servant leader, and not everybody is is embracing those details. Not everybody cares.
Right.
So if again, like giving information to your promoter well in advance, looking after your team in that way also helps them to get through in our case, the rough 4 in a row, not 13 in a row. That's a different level of care. But you get the point.
Yeah.
And the other thing is long drives. Oh gosh, you're coming from where? Yeah, okay, so you're going to be late when you arrive to my venue, and you're going to be anxious about being late. So everybody's going to be coming off the bus, gung ho.
Right.
These are important details to own.
So
here's a dressing room rider, hospitality rider, huh?
Just hospitality. So you've outlined what rooms you need, what's the use of the room, what kind of furniture is going to be needed in that room, which obviously a dressing room, you're going to need something different than an office.
Can you go back to the top real quick, Jen? Just because again, I'm stuck on the whole human thing. Also here at the very top this is the person you're going to be communicating with about the details on this page. And so while some production managers want to own all the conversations, I find that to be burdensome. And I also find that to be like, I don't want to go talk for the audio guys. That's setting myself up for failure. I think that the communication between the dressing room person and the backstage manager at a venue, that should be direct. It shouldn't have me getting in the middle of it, confusing it or making it worse for the person who's going to have to deal with those details for the day. So thanks for showing that to me.
Empowering your team to be
Not
able
micromanaging.
Yeah. Okay, so what are the rooms? What's going to happen in the room? What kind of snacks, whatnot, life-related things, an interview room. Knowing that that's what's happening in the room makes sense that you don't have like a list of, waters and snacks. Production offices, of course, you're going to have requirements that are more along the lines of tables to use as desks rather than living room furniture setups.
And note that this is simply a spreadsheet of details, and it is more or less deprived of anecdotal information, right? So there's a couple of Easter eggs in here that help you to realize this thing's super important. But most of this, yeah, you passed that. Make it fun here. We love it. What we're trying to say when we put those notes in is, don't be sterile. Don't be, I can't think of the catering supply company, the name, but don't give me that same frozen fried chicken fingers every day. Be creative. We're all foodies. We want you to go off and do something really ridiculous in catering. And we try to say those things up front. Not every tour wants that. Ours did. So, this has to be constructed based on need.
Yes. Noting any allergies as a person with a food allergy, it's super important. And then, somebody following up and making sure that on site that's been checked. If it's a buffet, things have been labeled. If they're gluten-free, dairy-free, have peanuts in them, whatever, like that. I feel like that has become a really important element in more recent years. I had another thought related to that, and I forgot. You're a tour of foodies, but not every tour is. And some tours
are
perfectly happy with Domino's pizza. If that's right. If that's what you can afford and that's what the people like, give the people what they like, right? So, and understanding that things like allergies, you need to clearly communicate. So,
they're in there.
There's kind of a story that I'll probably post the bits of reading material to a Jack White writer controversy in years past at a school, and the school published the writer and wrote a thing in the newspaper and was like, they're such fancy people. They had on there no bananas on several different places, but it was a cute cartoon and it was just absolutely no bananas. Well, there was somebody on there that had a banana allergy, and I think that would be an example of, when it comes to allergies, you don't want to be too cute and clever. You need to in bold, clearly state that's what's happening. So it's a safety thing.
Yeah. There's a couple of points in the Q&A I'll tick off real quick. Okay. Somebody's made a comment that it's easier to use a tab document like Excel. I'm confident that because there's no industry norm, if there's a document that's easier for you and it's readable by the receiver, go for it. This is, as we said in the beginning, this was how we chose to do it. I chose to do it on our side. And every tour, every package, every iteration, I'm attempting something new to find the exact right fit that promoters like and that the team can work from. This worked well. I got a lot of good comments about it. Some people hated it, and that's okay too. The challenge is, and the only requisite is, you're communicating actual needs in a way that it's easy to ingest and action on your behalf. So if I were to drive a point home, I don't care how it comes to me. The point is, make sure that what comes to me is good information and current information, and is not wasteful information.
So we got a question if this would be available to read later on. And I think what I'll do is I can go through and just specify the sections that you have, so people are mindful of what things should they be addressing, is how we'll go about doing that. So I'll I'm going to make
There's also one about pushback from local promoters and venue crew for more progressive requests. And the example is the McCartney request of absolute vegan environment for the venue. Again, it's a good question. It is a challenge when there is a unique skill to pushing your philosophical desires out into the world onto other people. And one can argue that it's not the place of the artist to do that. One can argue that artists over time have been impetus for change. So I guess my answer to that question is, with respect to an artist making their desires your desires, you still have the choice to take or not take the tour. Is it harder for me to eat vegan than it would be to eat the way I currently eat? Yeah, but would I enjoy the experience of trying it personally? Probably. Would it get old? Probably. I think that's that's to each person's risk tolerance or change tolerance to make a determination. For the promoters and the organization, when promoters are pushing back on progressive requests, you have to value that request. Is this something I'm going to die for on the Hill, or is this something that under ideal circumstances we would like you to do this, but if you're incapable of doing that for whatever set of reasons, let's have a conversation so I can understand why, and then I can express back to my artist, who may have been the person making the request, why we're unable to fulfill that request today. Some artists are able to have that conversation. Some artists are not able to have that conversation. Some promoters are able to be flexible. Some tour managers are able to be flexible. The unique thing about our business is it's different every time you do it. So the challenge for you as a person in a leadership role is to find out how to have the conversation, to learn how to have the conversation and negotiate for the things that make a difference to the client, your artist. Sorry, Jen.
No, you're good.
Okay.
I was just moving us along to the next thing.
Okay.
Or when we're ready. Okay, so moving on to meet and greets, which are super duper common now. Every tour has some version of a VIP package or a brand sponsorship or something that involves a meet and greet or a sound check party or eating a pizza party with the band or whatever. Like, this is super common. So really outlining what's going to be required in those situations and how that's going to run, because it can really vary quite a bit from.
It absolutely does, yeah. And so here are some of the reasoning for giving this detail. And many artists don't communicate this detail at all. They show up, and then a half an hour before or as the artist is ready to do a meet and greet, they tell the promoter they're going to do a meet and greet, and then the promoter's in scramble mode. So we chose to do it a little more organized than that and project these needs so that we can find a suitable room, and the promoter would know that this is going to cause an early door entry, and all of the elements can be in place in advance, and they can be forecast into the budget and everything else.
Well, and a lot of times if there's expenses related to the meet and greet that are sold through a VIP package where the artist and the promoter are not sharing that VIP revenue, they are also not sharing the expenses. So being able to have it laid out in advance, what's going to be needed and what are going to be the costs associated with that. A lot of times there'll be a VIP person that kind of settles their VIP thing separately, pays the venue for the expenses related to the package, and it deals with directly with the company that designs the VIP packages.
It's becoming more common. You're absolutely right, Jen, that there is a third party handling the VIP detail, and they have their own relationship with the promoters, and they're doing all their own advance, and they're carrying components for the VIP that either are on your truck or they've got their own carrying mechanism to bring them in, or they get them locally. But there's now, more often than not, a third-party outsource for the VIP experience.
Yeah. So on security, why don't we just talk about some things that you typically see on a security rider?
Sure. We will establish the protocols that we're going to go through on a given day with respect to the duty of care that we, the touring party, share. You will find in riders, less so now, since the tragedies in Manchester and Paris and Vegas, but you will still find in riders of some camps where the security director for the tour will claim full responsibility. I'm in charge. Nobody does a thing until I say so. And what we say in the Event Safety Alliance world is, you've just assumed a whole lot of responsibility that wouldn't otherwise be the artist's responsibility. You're in charge of your duty of care. Talk about the things that you need and how you will communicate with the local security provider and work collaboratively with the local security provider, because you do not want to assume the security for the venue when that's the venue's responsibility. So artists are often in the dark about this, but they may hire a security team who are putting out rider information or doing security advances where they are claiming publicly in writing that they're in charge of the audience. That's a big risk if something goes wrong. The reality is that the touring security person is in charge of the touring containment vessel, and that's it. And that's where they should be contained, and then they should coordinate with the venue security teams. So in here we would put things like the barricade must have must be of this type and have a kilonewton capacity of X. So there are some established barricade engineering specifics that we would communicate here. We would communicate things like what the arrival of the artist looks like, the departure of the artist looks like, security around the dressing room. It may often contain a dot map of the venue showing where we would like security to be positioned on behalf of the tour versus the dot map of the venue of where the venue is positioning security on behalf of the venue. Two entirely different things. We might also talk about police escorts in here. We would talk about credentialing here, what value, what access levels the different credentials have. We likely would not communicate the passport in advance. That then gives people, if that gets out, that gives people a chance to make counterfeit passes. So we wouldn't have included that here. That's the basic overview of it, Jen.
Oh, I know a lot of people have probably gone to the same venue for different shows and noticed that the search at the door can be very different depending on the show. So a lot of times the venue will have their standard, but the tour knows who their audience is, and there might be a discussion about and what kind of search is needed for the audience. So for the example of Warped Tour, one of the things that they would sit down and say in the security meeting every day is, a lot of these kids are going to shows for the first time. They don't know what they're doing. They're not trying to break the rules. They don't know that you can't bring in opened water bottles. Like, be extra nice. If a lot of the kids are wearing basically swimsuits. If there's especially like females in a bikini, you do not need to pat them down. They're like, keep it moving. It's not a drug heavy audience. It's not a weapon heavy audience. So those were the kinds of things that, make sure you are allowing them to bring in sealed water bottles, because that's the policy of the tour. So there might be some things that are very audience specific from tour to tour that would kind of be addressed.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to highlight, because that really sets up your risk management plan. That term may come as unique to some, but in the risk management plan for the tour, you're hopefully defining the characteristics of the audience, the risk matrix for gang action in a show, or perhaps you're doing an orchestra where the audience is senior and you need a greater amount of ADA type facilities in the venue. So every music comes along with a different audience characteristic, and nobody knows what that audience characteristic is better than the tour. Sometimes you find that the tour doesn't realize that that's something that they have to, or that they should be a part of expressing to the promoter. especially if it's a new promoter or a promoter who's never hosted that artist before. And then sometimes the promoters have the better legacy knowledge and know you may be a new representative of an artist that's been through a venue half a dozen times, and perhaps every time that artist shows up at that venue, he does some ridiculous behavior and climbs a truss on the stage or something. The promoter may know that, you may not. So again, that's another reason why that relationship should not be confrontational. It should be or adversarial.
Press and promo.
Yeah, so same premise here as the meet and greet. So anytime, if there are things that we're going to do that impact, audience in the building early, audience, activities happening outside the normal operation of the venue, I like to advance those details. Press and promo require, this is where we're setting up. The photographers are allowed in the pit for the first 3 songs, and they can take video, no audio for the first 30 seconds of the first 3 songs. Those elements are being defined here. There may be some additional access to the artist that's unique to that artist, where normally an artist may not come out into the audience for autograph signing after a show, or there may be specific promotional things that are happening at a given show date on a given time with a radio station. That's spelled out here. Or the tour may be a promo tour, and we're talking about the radio station interaction at every show. Again, just to give the promoter an idea of the ancillary things that are going to be happening around the venue, in addition to the normal business of putting on a show.
Ground transportation. So this is runners and runner vans?
Runners, runner vans, and artist vehicles.
Got it.
So in this particular instance, in this touring mechanism, this package, we were using drivers to move the artist to particular venues, or to ancillary things. So we're flying in and flying out. For instance, if this were Asia, these would be fly dates, and we would have requisite need for cars to pick us up at the airport, and luggage vans and so on. And this again sets up, hey, look, we want to make sure our driver's not drunk. I know it sounds obvious to the audience, but it's not. And there's a particular turn off on smoking. We would rather the drivers aren't smoking in the cars, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the level of how specific you are on writers will lead to, did you get the thing you asked for? The more specific you are, the more likely you are to get the actual thing or person that you asked for. So, I just want to make the point to everyone that being specific does not mean you're being a demanding diva. It is a way of communicating. And a lot of times, especially on the hospitality side, I know that whoever's going out and doing the grocery store shopping, they would rather know exactly what kind of water they want to have, the tour wants to have purchased, rather than standing there in the water aisle trying to guess. The level of being specific, especially if it's important to the tour, you got to include it. Technical.
Okay.
So let's look at audio.
So meat and potatoes here. In this particular instance, we relied on locally provided PA, I think, and we carried the consoles, which is a common thing for us in the Linkin Park Shinoda world. We've identified multiple options that we find to work best with this particular artist and music genre. And you see them here, preferred systems are. Now that's not to say that we wouldn't take another, but if you can't hit one of these 3, we'll likely want to have a conversation about it at the very least, and that would be a conversation from our audio engineering team to your audio provider, so that our audio engineer would have a comfort level of what you're going to put in there. We provide this additional detail just so that the local audio providers know what we're plugging into their equipment.
So I think it's important to put the detail that is relevant on the rider. But if there's detail that the locals don't need to know, don't clutter it up with every, you need to know how long the tour bus is, not what brand of tour bus it is, right?
That's right.
Rigging plot.
Very simple tour this was. The cleverness of our design was in the artist and not the lighting. Not the rigging.
So this is the view if you were on the ceiling looking at the plot. Is that correct?
That's right. And this contains details, what size motor, what the likely load on that motor is that we've calculated with the help of the provider, the vendor, and where those motors will be positioned in space. This is a very simple plot. The majority of them don't come off this simple.
Power. So
very simple here. Yeah, this is a European tour, so the power specifications are in European speak, and this is because we're not traveling in more. We were in one truck, I think. We weren't carrying a whole lot of power cables, so we wanted to identify what the need was, what the connector on the end was, and where we wanted that power to be, because we had this 125 amp 3-phase C form downstage left meant that I wasn't able to go get that audio power. I didn't have enough cable to go get that audio power if it were upstage right. Now, we don't control where the outlets are on stage. That's not to suggest, this is not to suggest that. What we do say is, if you don't have it here in this location, we need you to bring it to that location, because that's what we've got to reach.
So it's worth noting, I don't know that we've ever laid this out on the workshop. So stage left and stage right is the directions when you are standing on the stage facing the audience. House left and house right is if you are in the audience facing the stage. And upstage and downstage, if you imagine the stage tilting forward like you would fall off of it into the audience, the back of the stage would be up and the front of the stage would be down. I did that right, didn't I?
Yeah, to dig a little further back, the up and down stage is Greco-Roman theater, which they were actually tilted. You can still find some.
So the audience was on a flat surface, and it was the stage that was tilted so that the audience could all see the actors on stage, and we have reversed that now in modern times.
They weren't mutually exclusive, but yeah, it was all about forced perspective, which was where the lean came from.
You have fancier knowledge on that. Thank you for sharing.
I'm an old nerd. I'm an old theater nerd.
So I do not know very much about power. I picked the brain of somebody for about 5 minutes, and they tried to explain waves of stuff. So I don't know what the phases are. Not my area of expertise. But like this bit of information, did the audio vendor say this is what we need? And are you compiling this information, or did you have to figure this out yourself?
No, I'm compiling this information. So, on the request for proposal, I'm asking, how much truck is your equipment going to take? How much power do you need? Where does that power need to be? And how many mouths in catering, for instance? The good news is the power consumption has gotten less over time because lighting's moved towards LED. Sound is much more efficient than it's ever been. So, but those details are coming to me from the provider of the thing, whatever the thing might be, and then I'm capturing it, putting it into a concise page.
Stage details.
Yeah, so here we're talking about the physicality of the stage itself. Again, this is a club-sized show, and we had a minimum footprint that we could fit in. And thankfully, I was working. The artist in this instance was not, he'll make the best out of whatever surface we put him on. So we tried to get to this maximum capacity size for him. There was also a point in which the stage didn't look good if it was too big. The lighting was built that we carried with us was built for a 40 wide. You'll see in the photographs there, it fit nicely.
So if you were doing an arena tour, you could either carry your own custom staging, or you could use the arenas typically have stage pieces that are 4 foot by 8 foot rectangles that they can build a stage to your specifications, in which case you would need to tell them what size, what do you need for the sound wings, what do you need at front of house, and where should that stage be placed in relation to the back wall of the arena or some other stationary reference point.
Yeah, so that's exactly right, Jen. And this was actually a club tour, so in more cases than not, the stage was fixed. We weren't going to be able to make it bigger or smaller. There are opportunities to add decking off the front if we needed more depth, but you know, this is an ancillary detail in a rider for a club tour. And you're right, you carry your own, the decision to carry your own stage is based on a number of factors, not the least of which is there's something special going on in your stage. You've got elevators through it. You've got, you know, some special effects that require a specific stage type. It may be faster for you to do, you know, multiple elements of the load in at the same time, build the stage out over front of house while you're putting the rigging in. That way everybody goes to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. And then once the rigging's up in the air, you roll the stage under and you've already preloaded the back line, for instance, or some set elements onto that stage. Again, it all comes down to what is the thing that you're delivering. And those decisions get made before you obviously get the equipment on the trucks, based on what's the most efficient way to do this routing with this particular show and this particular artist's needs. Every show is different, and every, you know, the determination about whether you're carrying a stage or the stage is local is different from show to show.
So I'm going to drop in on my website on this event, in addition to the other things, and it will have, you know, this YouTube video gets embedded. I'm going to put in a link or embed. There's a time lapse of a Muse stage build, and what I love about it is, well, it's fast, it's fun to watch, and they do exactly what you said, where they built the stage on half of the arena floor that was not the half where it was going to end up, and they built the sound and the lights on where, and then when that went up in the air, then the stage could roll in underneath, and it was a custom staging that was round and had all kinds of stuff going on. It was pretty neat.
Yeah, so Muse is a great example. That, you know, the complexity of their show is fantastic. They put on such a great show, and it's because they want to bring all those nuances to the audience member that they've made the decision that a custom stage makes more sense. It, you know, it compresses the time to build, because you're able to build two components that you would normally build apart from each other. You can build them at the same time. Stage in one space, lighting and rigging happen in the other space.
So on to labor requirements. So this is going to specify your needs for load in, show call, and load out. It's so easy to read. I love it. You can glance and see exactly how many stagehands, how many loaders, electricians, forklifts, what kind of forklift, all of that stuff. That level of detail needs to be communicated. And then on the settlement end of this is the tour accountant. What I'm going to reference as a starting point for what did we ask for is I'm going to look at the writer and look at, you know, what were the labor requests, but I would make sure that the production manager has verified those timesheets and that all the people that were supposed to show up showed up. So we're only paying for what we got. Thoughts on labor?
Again, the more specific, the better. This would be a good place to make a statement about wanting diversity in your labor call, as well as in the lead-in page would be a good place to make that statement. Sometimes we go so far, if the show's super complex, we'll try to insist that the load-in labor is the same as the load-out labor. The time it takes to train someone to build a component and then have to train a different person to take that component apart at the end of the night is time consuming and potentially, you know, hazardous. So, this was not a very sophisticated show. The more sophisticated the show is, you may be breaking down stagehands into carpenters, props masters, video camera operators. You may be giving further detail. This was pretty much just a get it in, get it out kind of show.
And I know one conversation you're going to have in the advance is understanding if this is a union facility and you're using union workers, you're going to need to know what are the rules for that particular venue and contract. How long do they work until they're required to break? What's the minimum number of hours they're going to be paid for, even if it doesn't take that long? And those kinds of, the answers to those kinds of things are going to have a big impact on your day, and you might shift around some numbers or some start times depending on the answer to that to make it more cost efficient or time efficient or to fit the rules of what's required at that venue.
That's right. And you might not, in addition to that, you might not be starting everybody at the same time. You're going to start your riggers at 8 a.m. and you may not bring in the props guys until noon. So those things are important, not just to communicate to the promoter, but to communicate to Jen. So she knows when she's looking at timesheets that everybody follow the rules and that the timesheets match the order for the hands. This is one of the more costly line items. The labor is one of the more costly line items on any given day.
That covers the technical. We're popping over to the timeline.
Maybe you get to see it here. Yeah, there it is. So this was intended, this is a very simple expression to the promoter. Here's what our day feels like. This is kind of the sequence of events and the rough timeline when things are going to be happening so that he can schedule the house labor, the ushers, the security, the caterers, all of those things. He can work to this. Now, this says note, typical day. So that means every communication of this to the promoters was unique in that I may have a long drive and we might not get there till 8:45, and that needs to be adjusted in the the actual use case of those details.
I think that it's important to note that little tiny details when a show goes on sale, like what time is the show, is so important to double check. Almost once a year on Warped Tour and on other tours, we would end up with a situation where the time on the ticket was not the time that we expected it to be. And we would find this out a day or two before, and you can't reach out reliably to all those ticket buyers. So you have to shift your day and shuffle so that's where a typical day might become an atypical day. Oh, we're doing everything an hour early because there was a typo on the ticket. So,
well, and I would add, that's absolutely true, Jen. And I would also add that another place where cost impact is, when doing a club scale show versus an arena show, at the club scale, it's typically a house crew that are your labor. And they typically have a work day that starts at noon and ends after the loadout. And they're on flat no matter what the day is. So if I come in with a show that wants to load in at 8 o'clock in the morning, that's an impact that likely wasn't forecast in a budget, because that's 4 more hours on the day when you're dealing with a venue where it's an all in-house nut based on starting at 12 noon. So it's important to make sure you understand the workings of the deal as well. And if you can forecast the need to come in earlier, then that's a good thing to protect the promoter and you at come settlement time.
And as far as show times, ideally, in an ideal world, tours are Groundhog Day. Everything happens at the same time every day. It should, if you're doing it well, it should be boring. But there might be local curfews if you're doing an all ages show, or there might be 2 shows, an early show and a late show. There could be things that affect what your show time is. And so I would guess that on club tours, it's more likely to fluctuate what your show time is. And at an arena, it's easier to control the show time is 7 o'clock every day. So just being aware that there might be fluctuations that are built in, and being able to look ahead to what time are things happening tomorrow is something that the crew should kind of be aware of.
I'm going to take control of the screen, I think, because I was able to make
Go for it.
the calendar, the tour routing turn up. You have to disable screen
Oh,
sharing, and then with your permission, I'm happy to start tackling these questions.
yeah.
Oh, you've disabled screen sharing, so I can't do it.
Oh, wait,
Sorry.
wait.
Okay,
Try now.
let's try now. Yeah, there it is. All right, cool. So are you seeing the, yeah? So that's just to give you an idea of what that routing looked like. We were working in a partnership with the promoter to provide hotels in this situation, and we did a couple of days of rehearsals in Berlin, and it gives you an idea. Our pacing was 2 on, 1 off. In this case, 3 on, 1 off. Budapest was surrounded by extra days because of the travel in and out. There's a 3 in a row: Zurich, Munich, Prague, and then Tel Aviv. We did two in a row in the same venue.
I want to go on this tour.
Yeah, it's fun. I got to tell you, and getting the opportunity to select old hotels in old city centers makes it a bit of a, because when you're traveling by air, you kind of get half days off coming in and going out. So that's what that routing looked like.
Thank you for making that happen.
Of course.
Okay, well, let's start at the top. So we've gone over our normal kind of hour and a half time, but if you're cool with still going, I think that it's good to answer the questions.
I definitely want to answer the questions.
Great. What's the best pieces of technical info to include in the advance to make sure venue staff is on the same page as you or the artist needs? What details do tours or local venues usually get left out most often in the advance, and which
are the worst?
To get forgotten?
Yeah, all good questions. The technical, I hate to keep coming back to this, but it depends on the show. So there are iterations of touring where you're not carrying anything and you're having the promoters provide the lights, the sound, everything. You're just showing up in a bus with some t-shirts. In that instance, you need to give every technical detail. You need to give the technical detail of the type of microphones, the type of DIs, the type of PA, the type of consoles, all of it. The more you carry with you, the less refined those details have to be, the greater expense. But there is a balance. The accountant will tell you, the tour accountants will tell you of, artist headache versus the cost to carry equipment. The challenge of going to all locally provided equipment in venues where they don't do a lot of shows or they're not on a major touring circuit is they likely have old, not well repaired equipment. And if you've got a challenging artist who doesn't respond well to those kinds of things, and you go into a venue and you do the show and halfway through the show the PA dies or the console stops working or only half the channels are working, you've just explained why you should be carrying the sound console. So the decision as to what to carry comes with the show type, the scale of the venue, the artist, etc. The details to leave out are the ones that are going to cause your artist to have a bad day. The ones that you don't want to leave out, sorry. So when writing these riders, the level of specificity is dependent on the level of impact of the thing. I try to build teams and needs for things like lighting where we can be flexible. Like if we're going, I try to always be a good steward of the business. What do I mean by that? I can choose as the headliner to go to a festival if I'm working with a headliner who is ambivalent about the scale of their production, meaning we can build them a really good show with not a lot of stuff. Then I can go to a festival and not have to say, you've got to de-rig your entire show so I can put my show in on your festival. That's not necessarily the best way to be a good steward of the business. However, if I'm Paul McCartney and I'm closing a 4-day festival, it's reasonable to expect that I can ask for that sort of thing to happen and that the show is unique enough where I should ask for those things as a representative of the artist. So there's a fine line in making that decision-making process. You don't do it just so you can prove that you're with the artist. You do it because you need to do it. The artist needs you to do it. And the impact of the things that you're asking disrupt the festival is necessary to give the audience the full experience. So a veteran person in those decision-making capacities will try to understand artist need first, because that's the client, impact need second, because that's the ticket buyer, the other client, the other stakeholder, and then how can we be good citizens of this particular festival, and try to put that soup together, have a conversation with the artist. Hey, can we blow off the exploding teddy bear today, because it's really going to cause them a real heartburn. And maybe you'll get the yes, and maybe you don't do the exploding teddy bear today, but you give everybody everything else and they're really happy. It also depends on what territory you're going into. There are sophisticated territories, Germany. There are less sophisticated territories where they're just happy that you're there. So that's also part of the decision-making process.
That kind of the level of expectation on the audience's part.
That's what I mean by that, yeah.
I don't know that this fits in, but it is a theme that has been going through my workshops. How do you feel about confetti?
If it is environmentally friendly confetti, meaning it dissolves with water, bring it on.
Okay.
And if I'm a venue owner and I've got to clean it up, I have a different feeling about it.
Well, you're just charging the artist for it.
Well, that's true too, as you should.
Yes.
Somebody's got to do the work, right?
Yeah. Okay. How detailed do you need to be in things like labor requirements? I think we covered that.
We talked about that.
Do you need to specify levels of experience or types of people in a department? Upriggers versus downriggers, video hands and camera support, backline hands and audio hands, or carpenters?
Yeah, really great questions. The level of experience is a really relevant part of that. It depends on the level of uniqueness to the thing you're trying to deliver. If I'm got a 3-camera video package just for iMag, chances are I can use local camera operators and a touring director and have an okay show. I hate to keep using Paul McCartney, but I love the team and Paul. If I'm Paul McCartney and it's 10 cameras and I've got really intimate shots happening, I've got really unique moments that I'm trying to catch, you can't expect the local camera operator to be able to get those shots. So you got to carry those people with you. So in delivering the detail, certainly upriggers versus downriggers, that's an everyday thing. You've got to include that. Oftentimes the venue will tell you, if you go to Madison Square Gardens, you don't tell them how many riggers you need. They tell you how many riggers you need. They know their venue. They know the complexities of the different union relationships. They know the complexities of getting into the roof. They know their venue. Let them tell you what they need to do the show. Don't tell the folks at Madison Square Gardens how you're going to do your show in their building. It won't end well for you. So choose the level of detail to the level of sophistication of what you're trying to deliver.
So I think that one interesting thing about Madison Square Garden that people that are not familiar with it might not know is that the arena is on like the 7th floor. And if I recall, like, aren't there like just swirling ramps that forklifts are just like.
Yeah. And audio has to come in through a specific elevator, different from other equipment. So there are a great many nuances to MSG, and it's my professional recommendation that you work with them to get to the answers you need for your show, and that you deliver your information far in advance to have them cooperate with you.
Yeah. How do you negotiate the cost of sending an advanced rigging team to do a site survey? When do you send them in the tour life cycle? I would say there might be other reasons that you want to do a site survey. If it's a new festival site on Warped Tour, we would occasionally have new sites. They would always try to go do a site survey as early as possible to understand what are the quirks of this particular place. So you maybe want to address the rigging.
I think the other component to that, you're absolutely right. The other component to that is, this is an example of why you try to hire experienced professionals. This is one of those roles where experienced professionals can save the tour money in many ways. One, not the least of which is a professional who's traveled. If you're doing a worldwide tour and you can hire a rigger who's done most of those venues, then the chances of you needing to go advance those venues and actually fly a person to them are less. Good riggers know venues like the back of their hands, and they take copious notes and they leave with those notes, that legacy knowledge. The places where I would use, advanced scouting trips, an artist with really peculiar hotel needs, I'm sending an advanced travel agent. A show with outside the box thinking for rigging needs, we're going to rig the whole venue. We're going to put motors where motors have never been before. I'm sending a rigger in advance for that, and an engineer in advance for that. So those costs, well-oiled booking agents and managers and artists will know that their artist is going to be doing something super unique, and that they will have pre-forecast the need for those kinds of things. If you're lucky enough that the tour manager / production manager are onboarded early enough, that person should know to cause the advance work to happen. They're that front line of defense. Well, so Jen, but that negotiation is likely being considered at the managerial level before the package comes together.
I think that's usually a tour cost. Like, the promoter is not really going to absorb the cost of you wanting to send somebody out to double check what they think they can just tell you just fine.
That's true. However, there are occasions where a promoter may say, I need you to bring a guy out here because this is really unique.
Sure. And like anything, there's going to be some amount of, you ask for it, you're going to be involved in paying for it. So right. I know that a lot of times when we would have on any tour that is a large production, if there's a day off for relationship building, but especially if it's a new venue, when we were doing the ballparks together, we were doing minor league baseball parks, it was a new venue every time. A lot of times the production manager, the stage manager, the rigger might go over on that day off, check it out, say hi to people, see what the situation is, which doesn't add on any cost. And you can't do that for every show, but I noticed that kind of happens a lot when there's unique situations.
Yep.
Okay, so we did that one. Do you have a separate page for staff and general event safety requirements and procedures? Do you have a start of day safety meeting with everyone to ensure all people are working on site, know your expectations? Has this changed now with circumstances like COVID-19 or increases in terrorism and shooters? Is Jacob on this?
I was going to say, this anonymous attendee seems to have an inside scoop.
You're going to address this one, Mr. Event Safety Alliance.
Yeah, okay, so this is you're speaking my language here. Again, an evolutionary story. We come in the industry early days. We no regard for safety. The crazier, the more ridiculous, the better. We don't think about safety protocols. That's where the industry comes from. The summer of 2011, there were 3 or 4 really tragic incidents. The impetus for the Event Safety Alliance was the stage collapse in Indiana, which killed 7 people and permanently wounded 55 unnecessarily. That caused us to found the Event Safety Alliance and start to create these kinds of protocols, because we weren't, as an industry, asking safety questions of each other. We were just doing it. There are some out there who were safety proactive, but the majority at the time, 2011, not really giving much attention to it. So the Event Safety Alliance helped to develop the Event Safety Guide, which is the first of its kind in North America, written reasonable practices for safety in live events. Prior to this document, we were only referring to National Fire Protection Code and building code and things of that nature. And I don't know if anybody in your audience has ever tried to read that stuff, but it's pretty complex. So we distilled it down into this in roadie speak, in a way that we could all refer to this book and agree on a set of principles on how we engage with respect to safety. So the question, yes, Toolbox Talks, the day of safety meeting, Toolbox Talks, it is a proven fact in industry after industry after industry, including surgery, that the Toolbox Talk is an integral part of keeping people safe through the day, setting expectations, getting eye contact with all the people you're going to be working with on the day to ensure that they're paying attention and they're coherent, understanding the tools, understanding the risks, reinforcing the idea that we're all in this together. The toolbox talk is an invaluable way to start your day. You must do it. It has to become of your, part of your standard practice. And it should be done in a collective. In my opinion, it should be done in the collective, and then the riggers should do the rigging toolbox talk so that they can walk through the local providers what's going to be expected of them on that day and how we're going to be monitoring safety. And nobody goes up without a harness. Nobody goes up with tools that aren't tethered to their belt, etc. So big proponent of toolbox talk. I'm sure people on site know your expectations. We also bake in, everybody's in hard hats from the moment and preferably work shoes. We don't demand the work shoes, but hard hats from the time the truck doors open until the last piece of equipment's on the floor. And then after that, we're, hard hats and PPE. After that, we can doff the PPE while we're in the operational part of the day. And the reason we've chosen that timeline is that kind of replicates what, don't quote me here, but OSHA says what we do as a business is both construction and general industry. We are in the construction phase of our business during load in and load out, which has a different set of parameters via OSHA. And then we're in general industry when we're operating our show, which interestingly has some other parameters during the day. So we're respectful of the PPE during that construction phase, and during the general operation, we're not disregarding safety, but we have a different kind of safety monitoring that's happening. Circumstances like COVID-19, and active shooters. So when ESA started, Event Safety Alliance, the challenge was weather and structural. And then the next thing you knew, we had Christina Grimmie, and we had Pulse Nightclub, and then we had Manchester, and then we had Paris, Bataclan, and then we had Las Vegas. Each time the Event Safety Alliance has kind of broadened the scope of the thing that we're talking about, and we've invited an ever-increasing group of subject matter experts to help us guide the industry for those safety protocols. Safety is typically covered in a risk management document, health and safety statement, risk assessment, and method statement of how things are going to be done on the day. It is a separate document. It is something that's shared with the promoters, and we anticipate the promoters to have a similar document with respect to their duty of care. I hope that answers it. It's a very complex question. I invite you to come to the Event Safety Conference.
A couple of us have thrown some links in the chat, so that's how you get to the Event Safety Alliance. And
sorry, Jen, COVID, which is really relevant to now. I missed that part. So the Event Safety Alliance 2 months ago released the reopening guidance, which is reasonable practices for venues, scalable to venues of all sizes, of the information that we had then 2 months ago about how to respond to COVID and what mechanisms you should consider implementing if you're going to try to open now. First sentence of that is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So the ESA's earned its reputation by being impartial and following the science and the science only. We're not having any political conversations there. So there is reopening guidance specific to COVID, and we are advocating for an infection mitigation representative to be on site if you're going to attempt to do shows right now that can monitor that people are wearing their masks and doing the necessary things. Sorry,
I also want to throw in there when I did the show expenses workshop with Sean O'Connell, the operations guy from Live Nation Denver. He mentioned that Live Nation has now a new line item where they like monitor the dark web. They are doing like behind the scenes FBI style, taking a look at potential threats and what's happening. And I was happy to hear that that's a thing. So I can't.
Happy and sad, right?
Well, right. Yes.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that it needs to be a thing. I am glad that they are taking that step. I can't speak to any other companies and whether they're doing that, but I just wanted to throw out there that when it comes
I'll add that there are venues, outdoor venues specifically, that utilize all kinds of three-letter agencies that are hidden in this periphery, monitoring, potentially with rifles, and. It is the day we live in.
Okay, so questions about how directly connected are you with industry organizations that promote diversity in the industry? Do you get any consult offers from them to provide suggestions on wording or request? Do you extend this to include the local crew?
I wonder if I know who wrote that as well. I have just become aware of an organization called the Roadies of Color United, ROCU. That I think you can find that web link as well. I personally have opened a dialogue there. We're talking about extending that dialogue for the wider community to be a part of. My journey has been such that, I'm not even aware that the hiring practices are exclusionary, and I don't believe that they are. But I know with respect to the things that we've become aware of, we do our damnedest to then change our behavior. What does that mean? That means this is a really incredible time in the history of our country and the world that will have spun out some negatives and will hopefully spin out some positives. And one of those positives is this brightening of the need to be more diverse, and the need to just not say that, but action that, and the need to be able to identify professionals who can help everything we do to be more diverse. And the greatest miss, this is me going off on a pulpit now, the greatest miss, I think, for us as a community is the arts and entertainment has always represented those on stage in the greatest light of diversity. The actors and actresses and singers and songwriters, they're the most incredibly diverse bunch of people you'll ever come to find. And somehow, as an industry, we've missed amplifying that behind the scenes. I'm challenging myself, and I'm challenging those I get to know to do better at that. I'm coming to know organizations, as I know Jen is, and some of my other peers are, where we can go find professionals who have the trade craft necessary and can help us represent the diversity required. So the long-winded answer to your question is yes, those organizations are out there, and yes, we're going to continue to make them more popular at every turn.
Okay, do you put details about how local staff might interact with tour staff and especially an artist? How do you bring that up if it might seem too restrictive? How do you deal with that on site when mistakes are made? Like, have you ever had the don't look the artist in the eye? Or
I did say I worked for Marilyn Manson, right?
What is specifically make you call out? But yeah,
he's a genius, a very stable one. There are those artists, there are those moments. The way that I've chosen to handle them in the past is, proactively build approach tunnels, artist dressing room to stage, for instance. Hopefully by that time of the day when the artist and all the nuances around the artist are arriving at the venue, the crew has had an ability to create a tone and tenor with the local stagehands and everybody else locally, so that we can say in a jovial way, hey, artist is about to get here, shield your eyes, and then we turned it into a game. Most local crews, veteran local crews, know that kind of need exists. It's not every day. Sometimes you get artists like Chester Bennington who will high five every stagehand he sees on the way to stage. Sometimes you get artists who don't want to be looked at, don't want to be talked to. And our job is to find a way to implement that plan as downplayed as possible. I mean, you can go in waving your hands and screaming, "Don't look at my artist, don't look at my artist." That's one approach. The other is to have created a relationship with the locals so that you can make that request and they'll go, "Dude, I respect you. I'll make sure that doesn't happen." Right? So
I think it's also important. I know that as female touring people, sometimes local crews do not show female touring people the level of respect that has already been earned. And I think that when other authority figures who are male and I'm not, it's just male and female, but like the general idea, when other authority figures can be helpful in reinforcing that this is our tour person that deserves your respect, they're asking you to do a thing for a reason. I know that that support is always appreciated.
Yeah, it's a really good point to highlight too, Jen. There are, I can't speak in absolutes, but for this example, there are two types of leaders who are male. There's the one that does not address this when you arrive, and sometimes they don't because they feel everybody got to earn their own respect, and then when it becomes a situation, they step in and address it, or they don't. Or there's the proactive, hey, that person right there is a professional and you better treat them like one, which I think is what you're asking for, and it makes perfect sense and is in some circumstances necessary. I think it'd be interesting to start asking for female crew chiefs on the local crew who can then be leading that example to the boys. Like it or not, I have an easier work day. The more females on the crew, the more females in charge, the better my day is going to be. There's no question about it.
All the time I hear
that. And it's true. It's absolutely true. So I don't know how we get there, but the point I think you're trying to make is the male adults in charge have to take a stand. And if you see that someone is oogling or disrespecting or not giving the same attention that they would to the male counterpoint, it's up to the guys in charge to step in and make a point out of that. And how big or little that point is depends on your ability to withstand whatever the repercussions might be, or how big or little the situation is.
Thank you for your support on all of those things.
Thank you for being amazing.
Do you put details about how local staff might interact with tours? We already did that. Do you separate your event security document from your work safety info document? I mean,
we kind of talked about
your
that.
thing that people are going to take all of the information and send out the security bit to the security person, the hospitality bit to the catering people, the this to the that, right? So being able to have it divided up, I would think, is useful.
I concur. And you don't want to conflate security with safety. They're two totally different things. And because the safety dialogue is relatively new in our industry, it's often baked into the security dialogue, and they don't belong together. I received a 51. Are you out there? Can I copy just your page of resources and put it into the chat box, bud? I don't know where we find out if he answers that.
Well, he would like to know who some of your mentors are.
He said absolutely. So hang on, I'm going to copy. 51 sent this to me recently, last night, as a matter of fact, and I think I'll be able to...
51 from my workshop. Was it just last week? I think it was just last week.
Okay, so let's see how bad this looks when I try to paste it all in there. I'll put an attachment in there. 51. Why don't you just turn it into a PDF, that one page, and drop it into the thing? Okay. Anyway, we'll get it to you for sure before the webinar is over.
Okay. Well, since I mentioned this, so he would like to know who some of your mentors are.
So I came into the business working with Morris Lyda, who was at the time Genesis, Pink Floyd, Phil Collins production manager, and one of the, he was one of the Jake Berry names at that time. He was a Texas rodeo star before he became a production manager, and in his journey, he had been John Belushi's right-hand man. And his style was rough and tumble, and definitely impacted. Just when I thought I had done all the work necessary, there was still more work to do. So it was, those days of learning were, I don't want to call them bullying, but they were definitely rough and tumble. There was all of the lessons you got from the school of hard knocks. somebody's bullying you or abusing you or winding you up, and that was how we taught each other in the industry in those days. And then I was lucky enough to work with Bugsy, John Hugdahl, on Bon Jovi, and he had a different style and was compassionate in a different way, and made the circumstances of living on the road a little bit lighter than they were with Morris. Also early on, while still in high school, I was a volunteer firefighter, and I worked with the chief of the fire company. Was such a good leader. You would literally follow him into a burning building. I mean, he was just like, you got this, come on, we're all going to go do this together. And he was inspiring to me. But I think most recently and most impactfully, both Chester Bennington and Mike Shinoda of Linkin Park treated the business of making music and shows as a business. And they were no nonsense. They are no nonsense stewards of music. And that made me raise my bar to represent them. So I count them as mentors, and I count Bill Silva, who is the Bill Silva Entertainment, and I think he's the CEO at the Hollywood Bowl, as a mentor as well. Bill is a human's human. You know, he doesn't accept less than full effort, but at the same time, he inspires you. He gives you the knowledge as to why he wants that effort, and does so in a way that you're inspired to do it for him. He's a really great human in that regard.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Difference between European power speak and that of US, Canada, Latin America, Africa, Asia. There's probably a reference somewhere on power and electricity around the world.
There is. You can also hire an electrician. The difference, when I used that vernacular earlier on in the webinar, it was, European power has different amperages than we refer to here in the States. It has different connector types than we refer to here in the States. We're unified in our power connector type in North America. Europe is more or less unified in their connector type. England is a different connector type. Japan has a different kind of phasing than we do in the States and in Europe. We can have a power class, I think, to get any more detailed than that, Jen. It does get fairly nitty gritty, and there's a lot of vernacular to power itself.
All right, so do you ever mix carrying part of your own stage and that provided by the venue, so you can include some custom pieces while not carrying as much weight? And I would add on to that question also barricade.
Yeah, so yes is the short answer. Absolutely, again, how well can you do your advance? We carry, the easiest example of carrying our own stage and adding it to a venue stage is we carry our own graded deck thrust. So it's a stage deck 4x8 it's made out of aluminum, and you can see through it. And the reason to carry that is you can put fans underneath it, you can put monitor wedges underneath it, you can put pyro effects underneath it, and you extend the depth of the local house stage by 4 feet. But hopefully you'll know that you're going to carry that early enough along where you haven't impacted audience attendance numbers or capacity numbers. But the short answer, yes, absolutely. You can do a hybrid of your stage and their stage depending on needs.
I am not.
You can even do complex things in locally provided stages, providing you know what your needs are.
Awesome. So 5-1 sent me a file. I'm going to put it on my website because I'm not sure how to put a file in the Zoom chat.
You do that. I'm going to see if I can put it in the Zoom chat.
Okay. I quickly attempted and then decided to move on. What happens when the paperwork doesn't match reality? Do you include penalties in your document, which are the most important to match the reality rather than a close enough substitute? What if it's a labor issue, such as meal not starting on time, so the staff isn't technically back before the start of the show, or trucks aren't allowed through the dock at a certain time, but the loadout is running over time. I know some people do put penalties in. For every stagehand that doesn't show up that I asked for, you're paying us $300 or whatever. So I know that is a thing that exists in the world.
And it's a great question, and it is absolutely an active measure that some people choose to use. I think, for me, I don't know that I would. I'm not sure I would use that tactic. I think that it could backfire, right? We could have forgotten something, or something could have changed that we didn't advance, and then suddenly I've set up this "you're going to get penalized" kind of disposition in our communication, and then I just find that to be adversarial. I think I'll go back to, and again, how you communicate your rider and how you do business is on you. So I'm only speaking about the way I do business. I believe that, being clear and concise in your needs is all that's required, and double check those needs. Adding penalties means policing penalties. Adding penalties can sometimes sound like grandiosity. It can backfire. But if that's what works for you, then go to it. The laborers want to.
Positive reinforcement has got to be good. Where, hey, thank you so much for having everybody that you were supposed to have, and pointing out that you noticed the things that they're doing right also makes it easier to talk about the things that are not going right.
Right.
And
and in addition to that, contingency planning, right? So if you're requesting 20 stagehands and 19 show up, is that really a day breaker, or is there another way to get the day done that doesn't require now this big explosion of, you're going to get penalized, which is that tone will carry through the entire day. I'm not a proponent of that. I understand that people do it. Great.
Well, people have
it makes me look better when I come through and I behave like a nice guy. It makes me look better. So go for it.
5-1 also asked, what are some tips you've learned from promoter reps during your time on tour to make their life easier for your show, other than what you've covered thus far?
Tips learned from promoter reps.
Have you been a promoter rep?
Not classically. I did some work in Saudi Arabia, which could have been confused for kind of promoter repping, but I've not had that as a role. I learn from the promoter reps all the time, 5-1. I think the greatest lesson that has come over the story arc for me has been, the more I engage them and the more I make genuine efforts to be familial with them and include them in the story of the artist, and make sure that the artist can drop by and say, hey, thanks for having us, the easier my life is. I'm not claiming to have started out there professionally. I've landed there professionally. I had embraced a different style that was a spin-off of the folks who taught me in the early days, which every time I behaved that way, I felt like, and eventually honed this other skill. And then there are some promoter reps who are just not going to make it easy to be nice that day. And, you've got to have a thick enough skin to be able to work in that circumstance as well. But I find the veterans, the Rob Manleys of the world, and Ford Anglers, they appreciate the fact that you can be familiar with them and that you can treat them like friends. And if you remember something that they like, or that their wife likes, and you bring it along, and that's always a big deal too.
I mean, one of the funnest parts of tour is seeing your buddies once a year, right? Like,
right.
It's like, I haven't seen you in a year. We got a day to chit chat and hang out a little bit. Like, we make work fun. What I really get from the promoter reps is a feel for how the industry and business as a whole is changing, evolving, where it's headed. So I really like to pick their brain. How are other shows doing? What are you seeing happening a lot? What are the trends that are going on in the industry? From a business perspective, understanding what's happening over the course of a summer or whatever tour, but in different markets, you'll see trends over time. and picking the brains of the local people that are living these tours coming through their buildings every day. Box office managers too. Box office managers have their finger on the pulse of what's selling, how is it selling, how is the pricing, I love to go in and chit chat. How are things selling? How is your summer? Summer, I reference summer because most of my touring has been, in the summer. But I think that.
How lucky for you.
Huh?
I said, how lucky for you.
Right. Building those relationships, I think is key to develop your own professional development and staying in touch with trends, because our industry has changed dramatically in the last 20, 30 years,
Yeah. And if it can't be like family, I don't know what the value is really, right? It's one of the best parts of our business is if you're smart, you're cultivating relationships that make you feel warm and fuzzy, because it's music. That's what it's supposed to make you feel. Sorry, that's it. I'm off the pulpit again.
Are there any certifications you would recommend that people get for this kind of work? Could it be anything from Microsoft?
Is that Jake?
I swear Jake must be in here. Jake works with the Event Safety Alliance and Showmaker Symposium, which we haven't touched on yet, but is becoming a wealth of resources. My workshops are hosted on there. You've got a number of other great, I'm working with you on it. We've got a number of other great webinars, podcasts, resources. And one of the things that we are really looking at developing is, what do we recommend people learn, and what skills should they be preparing themselves for specifically for their job, but also those general life skills like Microsoft Office, being able to use spreadsheets.
Financial literacy.
Yeah.
Not only are we're also we're also hoping and will be developing some of these trainings as well under that umbrella. So what trainings do you take? Well, right now in a COVID time, if you've got the capacity to do it, I would recommend taking anything you possibly can. The ESA has made the event safety guide free of charge, downloadable on its website. The event safety access training, which is an industry specific basic training for safety, is available now for $9.95. I believe it used to retail for $70 or whatever. We were able to we had a learning management system that we were committed to. We're now out of that. So now we're able to dump the price. And when COVID hit, we're like, give it all away. So that price is as low as we can get and still pay for the hosting system. I just completed the project management professional, which is very complex. And I wish I had taken it 30 years ago. I would recommend, if you go to Showmaker Symposium, you'll also see a safeties additional safeties training hosted by our friend Mark Breen in the UK, and we're going to be putting more of those up. So there are a number of things that are very short form, easily digestible, that you could start doing now if you have the time and you have the ability to focus on it. And I know that this time is difficult for all of us, and therefore, you choose your own adventure here. But yeah, take anything you can get. Go check out USITT. USITT is also doing some very deeply discounted trainings as well.
And I would say, resources like YouTube are great for self-guided study on things like how to use spreadsheets, which I am a big proponent of having an understanding of that. Writing is such an important way that we communicate via email, text, so having strong writing skills, I think is useful for anyone when everybody's looking for a job at some point. You're going to be writing emails and, so refining some of those things that are kind of generic life skills, I think is important too.
Jen, can I'd also like to hit the PSA as well, if you'll allow me.
Yeah.
The brief version of that. This is a public service announcement from the Behind the Scenes Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Initiative. Even without the uncertainties of life in a pandemic, the unique environmental stress and stresses of working in the entertainment industry are extremely challenging. It's critical to make sure that you and those you care about stay healthy mentally, emotionally, and physically. The Behind the Scenes Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Initiative is providing tools and resources specifically for entertainment industry workers. I just put the link in the chat window. It's btshelp.org/mental health. These include a program called Be Seen, Be Heard, which is a 24/7, 365 peer-to-peer chat app. So if you feel like you got nobody to talk to, this is one way to reach out. There's an online therapist finder that only includes therapists. Hold on, Jen, can you hear me?
Yes, you're back. You were gone for 1 second.
Yeah, there's an online therapist finder. I think you heard that. There's an anonymous online behavioral self-assessment tool to help you understand what you're feeling. There are easy to navigate resources and links so you don't get overwhelmed looking for the help you might need. And suicide prevention information and posters are also available there if you've got a workspace where you can inform people that in a less contact way. Go to btshelp.org/mental health for more information. I know that doesn't fit the direction of the day, but I feel, and we just sadly lost a person yesterday, death by suicide. These are really challenging times, and I think it's important that we keep hounding that message in.
So I think it's a message for every day, because the way to help prevent suicide is to raise awareness and destigmatize mental health issues. And the way we do that is by talking about it. Not when it's a crisis, but all the time, right? So
that's right.
I appreciate you mentioning that. I think that that's
really
important for everyone, but especially our industry seems to be affected frequently by it more often than some other industries.
We live in an emotional roller coaster. Our business is at possibly the same time incredibly high and incredibly low. And I think that, having worked and lived next to Chester for 16 years, his death by suicide has impacted me in ways that I'd never expected. And, just as good stewards of our industry, I think we need to help. We uniquely to most other industries, we're emotionally connected to the work. And so COVID taking that away from us is more than just a paycheck. It's the thing that our hearts beat to. It's the love of community. It's the love of the audience. It's all those things are gone. And so that's made us particularly sensitive during these times. And, just reach out and touch people and let them know you care and that you're out there for them.
And it's important to also, during the normal times, living on the road, away from your family and your friends at home, and living with your coworkers is a whole different situation than a lot of people have in their lives. And being able to navigate that so that you are able to take care of yourself in that unusual situation, I think it is really important. So.
Yeah, and I was reminded about one of our own properties, and that is, at showmakersymposium.com, you can find the I'm With the Crew series, where we've got 11 episodes talking about mental resilience and our industry. We've got a couple of mental health professionals. That's a recorded series that you can check out.
Okay, 2 quick last ones, and we thank you all for sticking with us for so long.
How about that? Yeah.
But I think that this has all been really good information, and I think will be viewed, hopefully by lots of people on YouTube after the fact as well, because I think you really brought a lot of quality here. So quickly, when or where is the power class that you mentioned?
Well, we'll have to create that one, won't we?
Okay.
And the Toolbox Talk, Will Seaton, my friend over there, wants to know about Toolbox Talk. I have a feeling that's a facetious question because he already knows about Toolbox Talks. But I'm happy to do an episode on Toolbox Talks.
So I
a
think, I mean,
unique.
what I gathered, because I hadn't really heard that before, is that, you have a set conversation that you're having at the start of a work day that covers very specific things, and that is the name for that meeting. Is that?
Yes, but more importantly than that, there's science behind it, and I can't think of the name of the book, but there is a book and an author a doctor who studied the impact of pre-execution talks on airline pilots, flight crews, surgeons, everywhere where there was the stock market. And the value of the toolbox talk is scientifically proven. Let me just see if I have the book right here real quick. And it's, no, sorry. Anyway, sorry about that.
You'll find it and you'll let me know, and
Yeah,
I'll put it on my
yeah,
website.
yeah. But it's a fascinating read, and it talked about the journey started in the surgical operating theater, where he went to a country where there was like 50% of patients on the surgery table were dying, and it turns out that just by implementing the toolbox talk and saying, okay, our patient is Johnny. He's going to have this much of that. He's going to have his left arm operated on, and just introducing all the people around the table to each other, they improved it to like 5%. So there's great value for our industry there to learn from. Anyway, A. Mitchell's has an additional take on it. Let's read the book, everybody, and then you can use it as you see fit.
I think this brings our session today to a close. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time and your expertise, and the amount of time that you spend giving back to our concert business community is, I adore you for it.
It's very kind. It has been the love of my life beyond family, and I feel obliged to give it back because you can't take it away.
Go have a wonderful weekend. America, go be safe if you're setting off fireworks, people.
Yeah. Stay safe, everybody. Wear a mask.
Stay safe. Wear a mask.
Thanks for sticking out the thing. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.